Hello, hello, everybody. All right, I asked Alex if he wanted the dad joke, and he said yes. So here we go. What do you call a nation-state actor who's been in your network for 600 days undetected? A long-term contractor with better access than your own staff. I think that was probably the best one for today.
No, that's good. No.
There you go, thank you. All right, next up, we've got Alex Tilley talking the real state of North Korea's employment fraud operations in Australia. This is another talk I'm genuinely really looking forward to. So take it away, Alex.
Thank you. Wait till I'm done first. You never know how I'm going to be. Hi, and thanks for coming, everyone. Am I feeding back a bit? All cool? Right, sweet. Yeah, this is me. So, real quick, who am I? I've been around for a long time, all my life, unfortunately. So I started out in casinos and banking, and then I spent about a decade in AFP, financial crime, cybercrime, and child protection. And now I do global threat research for Okta, which is an identity company. This work that I do is more on the crime/state-sponsored side of things, but obviously it's all wrapped up with the sort of identity work that we do at Okta. So what I want to cover is I really wanted to use my time with you all to try and dispel some misconceptions around this whole North Korean IT worker thing. I really want to sort of level set Australia to this thing because there's headlines getting flown around, there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what's going on, and weirdly enough, through where I sit at an identity provider that also services not only work like large organizations and governments, but also smaller online retailers and everything in between, I can see a lot of the end-to-end activities of these employment fraud operators. So I've got really unique insight through my work into what's happening in the real world with this rather than just on the headlines. So I wanted to make sure we can use some of that information to level set with everyone to help everyone understand where to worry about and where maybe not to worry about. And the whole big point of this is the last slide there is I want to give you some tools and techniques to go away with to actually learn to better protect your organizations. It's no good me just standing here saying, look at all this stuff, look how smart I am, or I think I am. What I really wanted you to do is to understand, yep, this is some tangible stuff that we can take away for our own organizations going forward. So hopefully we'll all learn something together. Sound like fun? Maybe? Yep. Thank you very much. All right. So the situation, as we all understand, is the DPRK, the North Korean regime, is placing workers around the world, right? That's the situation that we all understand it. A lot of this problem is that this is a technical industry looking for a technical solution to a human problem. This is not, apart from the contagious interview stuff, which is, yeah, a bit of malware, a bit of exploits, a bit of, bad code there as well through some of your dev luring stuff. This is mostly email addresses and PDFs. That's what we're talking about here. Email addresses, PDFs, and bank accounts. So when the industry, being IT security, is looking for some sort of in to help get some sort of traction into this, they tend to really focus on the technical part of it and ignore the bit they can't help with. So I'm here to try and help you with the bit that no one else is helping you with, if that makes sense. The unsexy, uninteresting bit to some people. Really, this is around, we can't develop technical detections for a job applicant. Someone applies for a job, that's the idea, right? You put a job out there, people apply for the job. That's the idea. It's really hard to filter those. And I'm going to get a bit into information about how you can basically shoot yourself in the foot by filtering too hard, by trying to apply any technical technique to this, because it really is a human problem. So the misconceptions to really start with is that this is a US problem. That's the biggest thing. Second one is this is just a US tech problem. The third one, which is the most common, is that this is just a big US tech problem. People think, ServiceNow, Salesforce, Amazon, any of your big US tech firms, and when they think about this, that they're the ones that are hiring these North Koreans, they're the ones that are being targeted. The thing is that it's not. And I'm going to go through a bit of the information that we've got around as to sort of proving why it's not just the big US tech problems and why it's everyone's problem. I think it's really easy to sit here and say, yep, that's fine, we haven't got to worry about it, that's their problem. When it's not. It is your problem. That it's overblown. And I believe it's not that it's overblown. I think it, for a period here, has been the new coolness. And I get that. People look for something interesting to get their teeth into. I totally get that. But I think also when we're struggling for a way that we can get an in as a tech industry, we tend to try and focus on the bits that we can impact and that we think we can maybe sell a product for, let's be honest, rather than the holistic part of this. So we do tend to blow up certain parts of this scheme rather than others. And it doesn't impact my vertical. If you are not a massive American SaaS provider, this still impacts you. If you're not an IT shop, this still impacts you. If you run an automotive company, this impacts you. This is everyone's problem, but I think a lot of times we're not really focusing on that. And that it's only IT jobs. This is the biggest revelation to me when we did this work, was around how many of these jobs are not IT jobs. And how everyone is focusing on the developer jobs and ignoring a large chunk of the pie. And the biggest one is that this is a North Korean problem. This is not just a DPRK thing. Now, I've been chatting to some people outside, and I'm trying to rebrand this, right? Because we keep talking about North Korea, and my work is showing that this is not a North Korean problem solely. This is North Korea. There is Pakistani firms, there is Indian firms, there is Malaysian firms, there is Russian firms, there is Filipino firms. Everyone is doing employment fraud. And oftentimes you will see things detected and talked about as being a North Korean applicant when it was actually an applicant operating through a Pakistani employment fraud operator. But we have this big bubble because it's an interesting bubble, right? North Korea is an interesting sort of part of the world. We're like, this is this weird sort of hermit kingdom that does all these weird things. Let's put anything related to employment fraud in that box. And the second problem is that employment fraud is not a cool name. I was saying to some people that employment fraud sounds like a Centrelink problem, right? It doesn't really sound interesting. So if anyone does have a cooler name that is somewhere between North Korean infiltration campaign and employment fraud, please let me know. There is a hook somewhere in the middle that sounds interesting but isn't ridiculous, but I just can't think of it. So I keep saying employment fraud, please don't fall asleep. All right, so hopefully that's dispelled that myth. These are the people that you're talking about. There's a lot of, again with this technical solutions problem, there's a lot of talk made around deepfakes. Everyone's focusing on deepfakes. Deepfakes are an issue, they are used, but that is an interesting technical investigation, right? When we're looking at these things and saying, oh, they're using overlays and they're using OBS and doing all this other cool stuff around sort of masking who their faces are. Yes, that does happen, and there are some novel ways to do it, but oftentimes it's just a dude. Just a dude on a webcam. You know, we are looking for this technical solution when a dude just shows on a webcam. That's who you expected to be on the webcam, right? Your technical solution won't fix someone just on a webcam. So I think while we do run down that path of trying to figure out, oh, we can get the stream and we can, you know, deinterlace the stream and figure out some of the, you know, the added artifacts to the stream and figure out if it's deep faked, they're just coming straight in as themselves, pretty much. So oftentimes. So it is an interesting little bit there. I've done some writing on this in the last year. Read my blogs, they're interesting, I think. I wrote them, I think they're interesting. Me and Simon wrote them. Because we've done a lot of work on this, because as I said, Okta sits in a really interesting part of this puzzle where we've sort of found that we've got a really holistic almost view of this thing. So we're sort of starting to chip away and put out some bits and pieces of interesting information around it. So where all this data that I'm talking about today comes from is a little bit of work that we did, a big bit of work that we did, which is that one there. Read that one. This is where a lot of this initial stuff comes from, which is where we had a look at. We started with 40,000 identities. So I got together 40,000, in inverted commas, DPRK personas, or DPRK email addresses. First lesson, if you get a nice big list that looks really impressive email addresses, do not block it. Our work shows that at least half of that is false positives, right? And probably more, much more, and there's an interesting part of this, right, which is if you take these big lists, because everyone says that a massive indicator list is better than a small one, right? If you take this big list and block them, what you're also doing is you are impacting real people's ability to find work. Because there are so many normal people caught up in these, shall we say, overly aggressive OSINT sweeps of some of the indicators that are just bundled up as being North Korean and just shoved together and all blocked, that there are thousands of legitimate normal people getting blocked and filtered and flagged as North Koreans every day when people do this wrong. Now, I'm no big city lawyer, but I reckon there's a liability thing there somewhere. If you're saying if you're saying to me, hey, Tilley, you're blocked from this because I reckon you're North Korean, prove it. Why are you impacting my ability to earn a living? I think there's something there if someone decided to make an issue about it, but please don't just block them. What I say to people is use email addresses that you get as a scoring mechanism. Lots of what I'm going through today is around scoring. We all know about scoring, right? You raise a score, indicators get a 10, whatever, you get worse and worse. Do that. Do not block them because a lot of them are, well, they're horseshit. They're just inflated numbers to look impressive. So we took 40,000, massive false positive rate on this 40,000. We distilled that down to, I don't know, 20,000, then further down to only a few hundred that we could confirm were not part of any other employment fraud group, so not part of a Pakistani or an Indian or a Malaysian or a Filipino a syndicate, but operating out of North Korea with money going back to some of the specific banks that we knew about. And we distilled it down to a few hundred, which came out to around 25,000 meetings and interviews with around 6,000 companies around the world. Over the course of, so that's about a, 9-year period, 8-year period at the time we did it. So we sort of show that this started in around mid-2017. It really kicked into high gear around 2021, 2022. This is the campaigns to try and get jobs and infiltrate companies. And then it really sailed through at that higher level through 23, 24, 25, and on to today. So we sort of really were tracking it, and we had this massive amount of data, and we thought, well, let's have a look at this data. Let's see what we're actually being told around the targeted organizations, the individuals themselves, how their workflow works, etc. So the first thing we found was that a lot of people think this isn't a problem for us here in Australia. Yeah, righto, sport, good luck. It fully is. Now, interestingly enough, the numbers sort of say 1 in 2 of the target organizations were not tech companies. So half were not what we would identify. Oh, the really hard part is if you take 6,000 organizations randomly and try and assign them verticals, you'll spend a few weeks trying to decide what verticals actually matter and how much is too granular and how much is too broad. That's a really difficult thing to do because everyone sort of classifies their companies differently. We found a couple of different ways to do it, but what we found was, almost half of the targets weren't weren't tech companies, which is interesting, but then almost a quarter weren't American. So that was interesting to us. We didn't really expect that. We didn't really know what to expect. We just had a look at the data. The data said, this is not just Amazon getting a bunch of CVs, obviously. So when we looked at it, and pardon me, I've got only two slides that have got any sort of charts on them, so just bear with me for a second. But we look at it and we sort of say, of course, in this one, this one here of countries, the US is obviously massive in this particular data set of this slice of time. But when we break down the rest of them, Australia, it started at 1.7% of other countries, but of all other countries, it was 7%, and then that raised up to 10%. So we're sort of seeing that the Australian interest is going larger and larger and larger over time. That's in about 6 months, it went up about 2%. So about, 600 to about 1,200 different organizations getting multiple employment opportunities. And what we found at the top was, obviously, yes, ICT or IT, whatever, is the lion's share of it. But we started to see these other different verticals popping up. And that was interesting to me. The most interesting vertical that I saw was healthcare. Now, that was interesting to me because healthcare was an interesting one. It appeared a lot more often because it was writing a lot of apps. Everything's trying to go online now. So they have this crossover of healthcare companies with obviously access to private data, trying to develop apps to tap into a market segment, but trying to do it cheaply with contingent labor and hiring North Koreans to do it. So you have this interesting sort of cycle there where your personal, most private personal data is being protected or at least accessed by these companies that have really maybe a laxer level of control over who they're hiring to access their app development stuff. So you see this interesting sort of tragedy of the commons situation where it's everyone's problem with this data, but no one really has responsibility for it except for those companies that don't know they're being targeted. That's the problem. No one knows they're being targeted by North Koreans because they're not looking at this. They're just hiring staff they need to hire, right? Does that make sense? All right. This is a bit more interesting. So, when I've been talking to different verticals about this, what's made me really, really start to get interested in this is that, as I said, no other vertical is ready for this. Everyone thinks this is an American IT company problem. No Australian healthcare company is ready for this. Few Australian government agencies are ready for this. And I'm seeing them interviewing these staff because what happens is you advertise a job with keywords in it, you get a flood of applications, right? Your ATS system, your applicant tracking system, will help you monitor those and track those applicants, but then it'll start to do filtering for you. But you don't know who's actually landing at the end for your actual interview pipeline until you've done all that filtering. So when you have 5,000 applicants for a job and you filter out a few of them, what we're seeing is that the same identities are applying multiple times with different CVs and different cover letters to get through those ATS fences, to get to a point where you will then give them an interview, and you'll probably then hire them for a contingent coder job, right? Or, as I said here, all right, these are the jobs we're seeing. So IT workers is what everyone talks about. No. Yes, mostly, but probably about half is IT workers. But the rest of them are things you wouldn't even consider. Civil engineering is a really big one, because you can do civil engineering remotely, right? Anything that involves looking at something remotely, and analytical work or process work, etc., can be done by these guys and is. Customer service, obviously, you can do remote customer service jobs. What's interesting to me was the interpreter stuff. If anyone's ever done any interpreting knows that you can get various levels of certification for whether you can be an interpreter or a translator. There's sort of different levels of certification. But if you just need documents translated from one language to another, and for some reason you need a human to do it for you rather than just using Google or whatever, you're going to be beset with Chinese-speaking North Korean applicants, because they'll probably do a good job. That's the other bit. They'll probably do a good job for the month or two that they're hired. As long as you only need them to do process work, they'll probably do it for you. So we're seeing people hiring in HR, and the one that, as I said before, civil engineering got my attention because civil engineering is building stuff, as we know, right? Architects, civil engineers build stuff. And they're shipping out those plans and those different parts of the process of engineering, whatever it is, to a foreign nation state to then come back with whatever stamps and whatever, and then go and build something or whatever. So we talk about everyone asks me about why they're doing it. Is it financial gain? Mostly it's financial gain. But when you think about some of the documents that they're getting sent and just handed for these jobs, there is obviously another massive intel collect that's going on there, whether it was on purpose or not. I believe this whole system set up just to make money, and the access to data came as an ancillary win. They're like, oh, look at this. All of a sudden, we've got people in all these companies around the world. That is a tremendous collect capability. For any intel service in the world would love to have that collect capability. And the North Koreans have manufactured it, and we're all laughing at it because we're seeing weird guys in deep fakes and webcam. But there's this big intel apparatus behind that that's getting all this information. So what makes it really hard is you can't say what they've got. All you can say is, yes, they got 2 paychecks. We paid them twice, we don't know what they accessed, and we cut them off. That's not a great answer to give to a regulator. It's not a great answer to give to anyone, really, because you don't know what these people are doing when they're in your networks. We'll cover that later on. But I found this very interesting. Around anything that you put up that's going to say remote, you're going to get beset with applications. I would have thought, honestly, this is a pretty decent reason for some companies to say that we're going to go back to work from office. Honestly, I'm surprised that I haven't used it. I work from home. I love working from home. But this is an interesting one because if it's remote is the key. So we see a lot of remote jobs that are not doable by anyone who is not really skilled in that particular task, still getting the applications, still granting interviews. But because they're just being harvested as an ad. They're not like targeting that job. They don't say, well, this is a job, I want to get into architecture. They're just seeing a bunch of jobs for remote document reviewers and going, I'll get that. They happen to be in architecture. That makes sense. So there's an interesting sort of discussion there around what's targeting versus what's just part of the campaign. So the other thing that we have found is like things like AI, right? We looked at it and we saw this massive spike of AI job applications and interviews through North Koreans in around mid-2023. We're like, all right, that's cool. You could say that means they're targeting AI, right? That's an interesting headline. What you could also say is there just happen to be more AI jobs advertised in that 3-month period than there had been before. And I think it's sort of correlation and causation is a big part of this, is understanding, well, yeah, the graphs look interesting until you start to think about it. And it's the same with any job. It's like, yes, there's a lot of jobs being applied for, some of them just because they have the right keywords, some of them because they genuinely are being, part of the money-making thing is I can do that job for 2 months and get the cash out of it. So 2 months is about the standard time, right? You want to get a job as a North Korean for 2 months. If I can keep a job for 2 months, if I can make 10 grand, I'm doing pretty good. I've hit my KPI for the 2-month period or the 6-month period, whatever like that. Most of the time, they're caught and got rid of a few days to a few weeks. It really depends on the organisation. I've seen some employed for 18, 19 months. And when they get sacked, the companies sort of say, yeah, we had notes on file, this guy was suspicious, but we still kept him on board because it was too hard to offboard them. His or her, it was always his. Co-workers are saying there's something weird about this person, but we didn't sack them. So that was an interesting one to me, was to sort of see the length of time. So if you spot one of these, potentially that they've been there for a few weeks or at least 2 months. So I found that interesting to me, the different roles. Maybe I'm just a weirdo. Tradecraft, this is their submarine. It's pretty good for, what is it, like a 1970s Kilo that's been repurposed, I think it is. I'm sure it sinks well. They're coming back up, it's a bit harder. Oh, I should have said also, all of this is also, we're seeing this through these other countries. We're not seeing this just through North Korea. North Korea is the most popular, obviously, but we are seeing this everywhere, so that's why it's interesting. Identity documents, pretty standard fake stuff, right? Doesn't look real good, but if you're hiring 80 contingent workers, they seem to get passed. You know, this is an interesting one. I wanted to call this out, not particularly for who the person is, but in general, that background, the guys at GitLab, Ollie and Saksham have written a paper that came out about 2 or 3 months ago, I think it is, maybe a bit longer than that now. GitLab, North Korea, Google that. They've written a paper where they basically talk about one of the identity document creation tools used by a North Korean syndicate, which is, you can tell by the background, shows up constantly when they're generating these fake passports. So GitLab, North Korea, read their paper, it's epic. It's a big, big paper. It's really, really worth the read. But the fakes sort of vary, right, as you can see in quality. But most of them seem to get passed. Obligatory AI slide. This is where I sort of spend a little bit of time because, you know, my views on AI are pretty well known. But I found this really interesting, right? So when I was first looking into this, I started to see, well, why are these North Korean identities using all these different organizations that are customers that I don't really know what they are? Let's have a look into it. And AI-enabled came up over and over again. So this is early days. They were really keen on using AI-enabled job application tools. So the way this works is they'll build a CV using Canva or whatever's going around. They build a CV, send it off, see how far they get. They'll send off about 20 CVs, let's say. If one of them gets to the next phase, cool. What is it about this CV that got through that these other 19 didn't do? Cool. Let's run that back through an AI and say, well, make me another copies of this with this, or use this as a template now to make more CVs of different identities. Lather, rinse, repeat, right? As like get further and further through first interviews, second interviews, tech screenings, etc., like that, they will refine their approach using AI tools, and I hate to say it, it's the truth. They use these tools that your HR and hiring teams are using to screen applicants to pre-screen themselves through your job hoops. So when they send those applications through last, like when they send their good applications through, they say through all of your gateways because they're particularly tuned for that role. Every rejection is a training point. And it's pretty wild to see. The other one that I found was really interesting was they were using these tools that use AI to detect deepfakes and other types of webcam interview, chicanery. And so they were actually testing their interview techniques with these tools that your teams will use to detect the fakes and see if they get detected or not. So basically, they know exactly that the market that they're going for is using these types of toolkits. They use them to test their applications. And it works really, really well. So when you're seeing them, yes, you get this mix of really, really, let's say, ham-fisted approaches and really bad-looking CVs, etc., like that. And you get some really well-groomed and real set-up ones that are built particularly to go through your gateways and anything in between. But the ones that are really good happen again and again and again. We've seen the same applicant applying 46 times and getting through 45 of those times. It's pretty incredible when you start to look backwards when someone says, hey, this punter that you interviewed at this date or you hired, what we believe was a North Korean or a Pakistani employment fraud operative or something like that, and organizations start looking through their internal tooling and saying, well, okay, well, how did this person come to be hired by us? And they start running those indicators then, they'll say, well, yeah, no, this same identity applied for us 20, 30, 40 times. and we finally gave them a job. But I would think maybe after the 10th time, you'd say, listen, sport might not be for you. But maybe that's just me. So what I'm saying is it's more important to keep on top of the tooling that your teams are using and understanding that that's the tooling that they're using. Right? And everyone's HR teams and hiring and talent acquisition teams will use these toolkits. And oftentimes as CTI people or cyber people, you won't know what those tools are because that's not your bag, baby. Right? But you need to start learning these tools. Understand what your 10 minutes, right? Oh. Right, so big one. This is one of my major ones I wanted to talk to is the different types of these applications, right, of these identities. Everything between fake ID, copy ID, ID handover, ID takeover, right? There's a big difference in these types of approaches, and I need you to understand them because it's really important. So, first type is completely fake. Just a made-up person, right? Made-up person, made-up LinkedIn, maybe. CV if something doesn't exist. Sent off in the hopes for the best. Maybe sent through those hoops, as I said, to groom it a little bit, make it a bit more palatable for your hiring services. And that's fine. That's just a person who doesn't... Your teams, when they search OSN, will find nothing on that person because they were made up for that job, right? Fine, that's easy. The biggest and hardest one is the copied LinkedIn, right? So you get a LinkedIn, you get LinkedIn Recruiter, hit generate CV from profile. It generates a nice CV from some random person's profile. Really simple, right? Generate that. You change the email address and the phone number on that CV, send it off. For all intents and purposes, you are that person. You now have their entire work history. If someone calls up one of my previous employers listed on my LinkedIn and says, hey, did you hire Tilley for rah? Yep, he worked here between this date and this date. Cool, click. You've now verified someone else's work history that is not the person who's applied for your job, right? And that happens time and time again. So what do? Well, you contact the company and you say, hey, is this person the same as that? Yes, it is, because unless you're trading email addresses, and why would you say that, well, someone can't change their email address or phone number? People can change that. So you've got nothing to grab hold of in checking the bona fides of that applicant with that phone number. This is one gets through time and time and time again because people just trust that's the background check. Did they work where they said they worked on their CV? Yes, that name did work there. That is not the person you're talking to. How do you fix that? The best I can come up with is out of band using LinkedIn Messenger. And I say this, again, my feelings about LinkedIn are well known, but your HR and talent acquisition teams are using LinkedIn as a source of truth. I will guarantee you that right now, standing on stage in front of you. This is the source of truth to your talent acquisition teams. The only way I can think of get around this is to contact via LinkedIn Messenger the profile that you are talking to on LinkedIn and say, hey, did you just apply for a job with us with this email and this phone number? And then hope that the bad guy hasn't also taken over that LinkedIn profile, which they can do through some of the other stuff. So you really are in a bit of trouble there if you're trying to verify the bona fides of who you're talking to. This is why I'm saying this is a real big problem, because then you're getting thousands of applicants and you're hiring, because you've got a crunch, you're hiring like 80 people for this payroll processing job. You're trying to do this with every single one. Your TA team's going to have a kitten because it's impossible to try and do that in the time frame required. And that's why this keeps working, right? We're talking about this works. This stuff is really, really insidious. And that's if you use LinkedIn as a source of truth. Because then if you go to one of your background checking companies and say, hey, here's the applicant I have. Confirm everything on this CV. Everything on that CV will come back ticked because it's all real except for the person you're talking to. I think I've made that point. All right. The other one that's probably even worse is ID handover. In these days of layoffs, etc., a lot of people need work. Personally, here. This is me talking to a North Korean recruiter here. Oops. As you can see, I got a bit frustrated on the third line there. But they approached an identity of mine saying, hey, just don't tweet that or LinkedIn it for me. Just do me a favor, but you can have photos, it's fine. But, mostly because of the language, I'll get in trouble. But you can see, you approach someone and say, hey, $500, boom, give me that, and I'll give you $500, right? You've just taken over the identity, well, it's been handed over to you. When your TA team calls them, that person is going to answer because they need the 500 bucks. When you say come in for a drug screening, guess what? Someone shows up to pee in a cup, right? In America, there used to be a thing called 99 form. 5 minutes, won't worry about that. But it does have, also it has that well-aged OSINT footprint for your teams to look at, right? This punter exists. They just need money because they've been laid off by Meta or whoever. So that's a really hard one. Again, the problem with that is you can't verify around that. The way that you fix all this is not to fix it, but it is constant identity verification. That is not a sales pitch. I haven't got a product for that. What I'm saying is there are 4 people involved sometimes in the application for that job. There is the name on the link, and the name of the photo on the LinkedIn profile. There's the photo often on the CV and on the initial screening. There's the person who shows up for the first or second interview on a webcam, and there's the person who shows up for a team meeting maybe a month or 2 later on. Most of the time, there'll be 4 separate faces. You can catalog those faces, and someone has to be comparing them and saying, wait a minute, that is not the same guy as that person. This is a very manual task at that point. There are facial recognition systems that you can use for that sort of stuff. That's out of sight of my bag, but that's what you have to do is consistent, continuous, random timing identity verification of the face. I can't think of any better way. Background checks. I've edited this slide. Background checks are not good. Depending on what you pay for is what you get. As I say, they tick the boxes that what the person is saying is true. It is a negative vet. Fair enough, we can't all pay for positive vetting, I get it. But we put our trust in these things as being, again, a source of truth. They're not, they're a tool, not a very good one in some of these situations. All right, 1.5 minutes, let's do this. So, when you've hired one, let's just say that you've hired one. Here's some tools you can use, right? So what do? Well, a really big one is that third one there, use of every remote control tool in the world. Once you hire them, their very first day on your work laptop, they're going to try and install any sort of remote access tool they can, one after the other. They'll just try everything until they get one that works. So if you send someone a laptop and the second day it's fired up, you see them trying to install AnyDesk and TeamViewer and OBS and all this sort of stuff, something funny is going on, right? Not a great detection, but it'll work. IP KVMs, etc., whole other story, no time for it, look out for them. Address changes and bank account changes are another big one. This is now up to your TA team, your HR team to look into this. Has the person changed their delivery address for that laptop because their grandma got sick 4 times? Has the bank account changed every paycheck because it was a mule account that got busted? These things are things you need to look out for, not easy. Right, yeah, biggest problem is on detection. What did they access? That is a really, really hard question to answer when it's been one of your staff members. This person was employed by our company as a software dev or as an architect for 2 months. What did they do? I need to know everything they did. Tough question to ask, Your Honor. Behavior red flags. Yeah, this is all the big one around this is trust your staff to tell you something's up. It's hard because you don't want it to become a witch hunt because someone doesn't like their colleague, but you need someone to say, listen, there's something's off about this, and have a process to deal with that to believe them. Righto, he's getting up, I'm gonna get chucked off real quick. So, homework, this is the big one. Homework, here we go. Do you know your HR/insider/talent acquisition team? No, get to know them. These are long processes. Get to know them, understand their processes, understand the tools they use, get to know those tools. Getting access to the CVs your company have will take months. Start that process now. They're clapping, I've got to get off. If you get access to your CVs, extract the metadata en masse, start combing through it. Something like this, right? This is a really basic one. That's a Canva ID. If you have 15 CVs with different names, all using the exact same Canva ID, something could be up, right? And given the volume you're talking about, we're talking about thousands of applications here, you will see these things popping up where there will be authors that are repeated. There will be installations that are repeated and other artifacts that you can technically look at that are repeated. There is no bullets. Oh yeah, and keeping notes, I'm getting the hook. Keep notes. Tell your hiring managers, your talent acquisition team and your HR team to keep notes. This person was sacked because he got through the second interview and we didn't like him, therefore that email address can be flagged. The score on this one goes up because it used a VPN every time and kept dropping out. The background looked weird. These things as notes will help when someone figures out in 6 months that you had hired a North Korean or a Pakistani employment fraud worker 6 months ago. Those notes are not kept by many places, and they are incredibly valuable. Start your processes internally to keep these notes. Something strange happened, I didn't do this, I blocked that person. Yes, it's a problem here. Questions?
Thanks, Alex.
I could go all day, so that's the 10-minute version.
Do you think we have time for questions?
I can go all day.
No, we don't have time for questions. But I'm sure there are plenty in a room. Are you around today, tonight, tomorrow? Lovely. If you do have any questions, find Alex. He will gladly have a chat with you about any questions you may have. Another round of applause for Alex, everyone.
Thank you.